The Battle of Passchendaele was a campaign of the First World War, fought by the British and their allies against the German Empire. The battle took place on the Western Front, between July and November 1917, for control of the ridges south and east of the Belgian city of Ypres in West Flanders, as part of a strategy decided by the Allies at conferences in November 1916 and May 1917. Passchendaele lay on the last ridge east of Ypres, 5 miles from a railway junction at Roeselare, which was a vital part of the supply system of the German Fourth Army. The next stage of the Allied strategy was an advance to Torhout to Couckelaere, to close the German-controlled railway running through Roeselare and Torhout, which did not take place until 1918. Further operations and a British supporting attack along the Belgian coast from near Nieuwpoort, combined with an amphibious landing, were to have reached Bruges and then the Dutch frontier. The resistance of the German Fourth Army, unusually wet weather, the onset of winter and the diversion of British and French resources to Italy, following the Austro-German victory at the Battle of Caporetto allowed the Germans to avoid a general withdrawal, which had seemed inevitable to them in October. The campaign ended in November when the Canadian Corps captured Passchendaele. In 1918 the Battle of the Lys and the Fifth Battle of Ypres were fought before the Allies occupied the Belgian coast and reached a Dutch frontier. A campaign in Flanders was controversial in 1917 and has remained so. British Prime Minister Lloyd George opposed the offensive as did General Foch, the French Chief of the General Staff. The British Commander Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig did not receive approval for the Flanders operation from the War Cabinet until July 25. Matters of dispute by the participants and writers and historians since the war have included the wisdom of pursuing an offensive strategy in the wake of the failed naval offensive, rather than waiting for the arrival of the American armies in France. The choice of Flanders over areas further south or the Italian front. The climate and weather in Flanders. Haig's selection of General Hubert Gough and the Fifth Army to conduct the offensive. Debates over the nature of the opening attack between advocates of shallow and deeper objectives. The passage of time between the Battle of Messines and the opening attack of the battles of Ypres. The extent to which the internal troubles of the French armies motivated British persistence in the offensive. The effect of mud on operations. The decision to continue the offensive in October once the weather had broken and the human cost of the campaign on the soldiers of the German and British armies. Background: Flanders 1914 1917, the Treaty of London recognised Belgium as an independent and neutral state. The German invasion of Belgium on August 4, 1914, in violation of Article 7 of the treaty, was the reason given by the British government for declaring war. British military operations in Belgium began with the arrival of the British Expeditionary Force at Mons on August 22. On October 16 the Belgians, with some French reinforcements, began the defence of the French Channel ports and what remained of unoccupied Belgium at the Battle of the Ypres. Operations further south in Flanders commenced, after attempts by the French and German armies to turn their opponents' northern flank through Picardy, Artois and Flanders, reached Ypres. On October 10, Lieutenant General Erich von Falkenhayn, Chief of the General Staff, ordered an attack towards Dunkirk and Calais followed by a turn south to gain a decisive victory. When the offensive failed, Falkenhayn ordered the capture of Ypres to gain a local advantage. By November 12, the First Battle of Ypres had failed, and was stopped on November 18. In December 1914, the Admiralty began discussions with the War Office for a combined operation to occupy the Belgian coast to the Dutch frontier, by an attack along the coast combined with a landing at Ostend. Eventually the British were obliged to participate in the French offensives further south. Thus large British offensive operations in Flanders were not possible in 1915, due to the consequent lack of resources. The Germans conducted their own Flanders offensive at the Ypres, making the Ypres salient more costly to defend. Sir Douglas Haig succeeded Sir John French as Commander-in-Chief of the BEF on December 19, 1915. A week after his appointment Haig met Vice Admiral Sir Reginald Bacon, who emphasized the importance of obtaining control of the Belgian coast, to end the threat from there by German naval forces. Haig was skeptical of a coast operation, believing that a landing from the sea would be far more difficult than anticipated and that an advance along the coast would require so much preparation that the Germans would have ample warning. Haig preferred an advance from Ypres, to bypass the flooded area around the Yser and the coast, before a coastal attack was attempted, to clear the coast to the Dutch border. In January 1916, Haig ordered General Plumer to plan offensives against Messines Ridge, Lille and Houthoulst Forest. General Rawlinson was also ordered to plan an attack from the Ypres salient on February 4. Planning by Plumer continued, but the demands of the battles of Verdun and the Somme absorbed the offensive capacity of the British Expeditionary Force. On 15 and 29 November 1916, as the Battle of the Somme paused, Haig met Gar copyright Na copyright Raldama copyright Egypt and the other allies at Chantilly. An offensive strategy to overwhelm the Central Powers was agreed, with attacks planned on the Western, Eastern and Italian fronts, by the first fortnight in February 1917. A meeting in London of the Admiralty and General Staff urged that the Flanders operation be undertaken in 1917, and Joffre replied on December 8 agreeing to the proposal for a Flanders campaign after the spring offensive. The plan for a year of steady attrition on the Western Front, with the main effort in the summer being made by the British Expeditionary Force, was scrapped by Nivelle and the French government for a decisive battle, to be conducted in February by the French army, with the British Army's contribution becoming a preliminary operation, the Battles of Arras. Nivelle planned an operation in three parts: preliminary offensives to pin German reserves by the British at Arras and the French between the Somme and the Oise, a French breakthrough offensive on the Aisne, then pursuit and exploitation. The plan was welcomed by Haig with reservations, which he addressed on January 6. After repeated insistence on Haig's part, Nivelle agreed to a proviso that if the first two parts of the operation failed to lead to Part 3, they would be stopped so that the British could move their main forces north for the Flanders offensive, which Haig argued was of great importance to the British government. Haig wrote on January 23 that it would take 6 weeks to move British troops and equipment from the Arras front to Flanders, and on March 14 he noted that the attack on Messines Ridge could be made in May. On March 21 he wrote to Nivelle that it would take 2 months to prepare the attacks from Messines to Steenschort, but that the Messines attack could be ready in 6 weeks. On May 16 Haig wrote that he had divided the Flanders operation into 2 phases, one to take Messines Ridge and a main attack several weeks later. British determination to clear the Belgian coast took on more urgency after the Germans resumed unrestricted submarine warfare on February 1, 1917. Small operations took place in the Ypres salient in 1916, some being German initiatives to distract the Allies from the preparations for the offensive at Verdun and later to try to divert Allied attention from the Battle of the Somme. Other operations were begun by the British, to regain territory or to evict the Germans from ground overlooking their positions. Engagements took place on February 12 at Boesingen and on February 14 at Hooge and Sanctuary Wood. There were actions on 14 February 15 and 1 March 4 at the Bluff, March 27 April 16 at the St. Eloi craters and the Battle of Mount Sorel 2 June 13. In January 1917, the Second Army held the line in Flanders from Laventie to Boesingen, with 11 divisions and up to 2 in reserve. There was much trench mortaring, mining and raiding by both sides, and from January to May the Second Army had 20,000 casualties. In May, reinforcements began moving to Flanders from the south, 2 corps and 17 divisions had arrived by the end of the month. Strategic background. Several British and French operations took place beyond Flanders during the Third Ypres campaign, intended to assist Allied operations at Ypres, by obstructing the flow of munitions and reinforcements to the German Fourth Army in Belgium and to exploit opportunities created by the German need to economize elsewhere. German offensives in Russia and against Italy were postponed several times as the demand for men and munitions in Flanders left little available for other operations, and the French army was able to continue its recuperation after the Nivelle offensive. Prelude, geography and climate. The front line around Ypres had changed relatively little since the end of the Second Battle of Ypres. The British held the city, while the Germans held the high ground of the Messines-Withdrawal ridge to the south, the lower ridges to the east and the flat ground to the north. The Ypres front was a salient bulging into German positions, overlooked by German artillery on the higher ground. It was difficult for the British forces to gain ground observation of the German rear areas east of the ridges. In Flanders, sands, gravels and marls predominate, in places covered by silts. The coastal strip is sand but a short way inland, the ground rises to the Vale of Ypres, which before 1914 was a flourishing market garden. Ypres is 20 meters above sea level. Bixschoote 4 miles to the north is at 8.5 meters. To the east the land is at €25 meters for several miles, with the Steenbeek River at 15 meters near St. Julian. There is a low ridge from Messines, 80 meters at its highest point, running northeast past Clapham Junction at the west end of Nieuwpoort Plateau and Nieuwpoort, to Passchendaele, declining from there to a plain further north. Gradients vary from negligible, to 1 in 60 at Bruges, 1 in 33 at Zonnebeek. Underneath the soil is London clay, sand and silt. According to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission categories of sand, sandy soils and well-balanced soils, Messines Ridge is well-balanced soil, and the ground around Ypres is sandy soil. The ground is drained by many streams, canals and ditches which need regular maintenance. Since 1914 much of the drainage had been destroyed, although some parts had been restored by land drainage companies brought from England. The area was considered by the British to be drier than Lewes, Givenchy and Plug Streetwood further south. A 1989 study of weather data recorded at Lille, 16 miles from Ypres between 1867 and 1916, showed that August was more often dry than wet, that there was a trend towards dry autumns and that average rainfall in October had decreased over the previous 50 years. British plans for a Flanders campaign, preparations for operations in Flanders began in 1915, with the doubling of the Hazebroucke-Ypres rail line and the building of a new Limburg-Weser-Proven which was doubled in early 1917. Progress on roads, rail lines, railheads and spurs in the Second Army Zone was continuous and by mid-1917 gave the area the most efficient supply system of the British Expeditionary Force in France. Several plans and memoranda for a Flanders offensive were produced between January 1916 and May 1917, in which the writers tried to relate the offensive resources available to the terrain and the likely German defence. In early 1916 the importance of the capture of the Nieuwpoort Plateau for an advance further north was emphasized by Haig and the army commanders. On February 14, 1917 Colonel McMullen of the GHQ staff, proposed that the plateau be taken by a mass tank attack, reducing the need for artillery. In April a reconnaissance by Captain G. Q. Martel found that the area was unsuitable for tanks. On February 9 General Rawlinson, commander of the Fourth Army, suggested that Messines Ridge could be taken in one day and that the capture of the Nieuwpoort Plateau should be fundamental to the attack further north. He suggested that the southern attack from St. Yves to Mount Sorel should be first and that Mount Sorel to Steenschorp be attacked within 48 to 72 hours. After discussions with Rawlinson and Plumer and the incorporation of Haig's changes, McMullen submitted his memorandum on February 14. With amendments the memorandum became the GHQ 1917 plan. On May 1, 1917, Haig wrote that the Nivelle offensive had weakened the German army but that a decisive blow would be premature. An offensive at Ypres would continue the wearing-out process, on a front where the Germans could not refuse to fight. Even a partial success would improve the tactical situation in the Ypres salient, reducing the exceptional wastage, which occurred even in quiet periods. In early May Haig set the timetable for his Flanders offensive, with June 7 the date for the preliminary attack on Messines Ridge. A week after the Battle of Messines Ridge, Haig gave his objectives to his army commanders, wearing out the enemy, securing the Belgian coast and connecting with the Dutch frontier by the capture of Passchendaele Ridge, followed by an advance on Roeselare and Operation Hush, an attack along the coast with an amphibious landing. If manpower and artillery were insufficient, only the first part of the plan might be fulfilled. On April 30, Haig told Gough, the Fifth Army commander, that he would lead the northern operation, and the coastal force, although cabinet approval for the offensive was not granted until June 21. German defences in Flanders. The Fourth Army had 25 miles of front to defend with three groups, Dixmude, Ypres and Withdrawal. Group Steden was added later. Group Dixmude held 12 miles with 4 front divisions and 2 Eangrave divisions. Group Ypres held 6 miles from Pilkum to Menin Road with 3 front divisions and 2 Eangrave divisions, and Group Witskut held a similar length of front south of Menin Road with 3 front divisions and 3 Eangrave divisions. The Eangrave divisions were placed behind the Menin and Passchendaele ridges. 5 miles further back were 4 more Eangrave divisions and 7 miles beyond them another 2 in Oberst-Heerleitung Reserve. German anxiety that the British would exploit their victory at Messines by advancing to the Bassevilbeek spur beyond the north end of Messines Ridge, led Crown Prince Ruprecht on June 9 to propose a withdrawal to the Flandern Line in the area east of Messines. Construction of defences in the area began, but on June 13 Colonel von Lossberg arrived as the new Chief of Staff of Fourth Army. Lossberg rejected the proposed withdrawal to the Flandern Line and ordered that the current front line east of the Schienen Line be held rigidly, as the front of a deepened Flandern Stellung, in front of the Flandern Line, which was to become Flandern I, with a new Flandern II line built west of Menin, north to Torhout and Passchendaele, at the back of a new Flandern II Stellung. Construction of Flandern III was begun east of Menin north to Roeselare. On June 25 Ludendorff suggested to Ruprecht that Group Ypres should withdraw to the Wilhelm Line, leaving only outposts and the Albrecht Line. On June 30 Ruprecht's Chief of Staff, General von Kuhl, suggested a withdrawal to Flandern I along Passchendaele Ridge, meeting the old front line in the north near Langemarck and close to Armentières in the south. Such a withdrawal would avoid a hasty retreat from Pilkum Ridge and also force the British into a time-consuming redeployment. Lossberg disagreed, believing that the British would launch a broad front offensive, that the ground east of the Schienen Line was easy to defend, that the Menin Road Ridge could be held if it was made the Scheidepunkt of the German defensive system, and that Pilkum Ridge deprived the British of ground observation over the Steenbeek Valley, while the Germans could see the area from Passchendaele Ridge, allowing German infantry to be supported by observed artillery fire. Lossberg's judgment was accepted and no withdrawal was made. Messines Ridge, 7 June 17. The first stage in the British plan was a preparatory attack on the German positions south of Ypres at Messines Ridge. These German positions dominated Ypres and, unless neutralised, would be able to enfilade any British attack eastwards from the salient. The British advance began on June 7 and was preceded by a unique display of military pyrotechnics. Since mid-1915, the British had been covertly digging mines under the German positions on the Messines Ridge. By June 1917 21 mines had been dug, filled with nearly 1 million lb of explosives. The Germans knew the British were mining and had taken some countermeasures, but they were surprised by the extent of the mining. 2 of the British mines failed to detonate, but the remaining 19 were fired on June 7 at 3:10 am. British summertime. The final objectives were largely gained before dark. British losses in the morning were light, although the plan had expected casualties of up to 50% in the initial attack. As the infantry advanced over the back edge of the ridge, giving targets to German artillery and machine guns, British artillery was less able to provide covering fire. Fighting continued on the lower slopes, on the east side of the ridge until June 14. The attack prepared the way for the main attack later in the summer, by removing the Germans from the dominating ground on the southern face of the Ypres salient, that they had held for 2 years. Kerensky Offensive. The Russian army launched the Kerensky Offensive in an attempt to honor the agreement struck with its allies at the Chantilly meeting of 15 November 16, 1916. After the brief success of the Kerensky Offensive 1 July 19 and its disastrous sequel, when Ludendorff's General Reserve of 6 divisions captured Riga, 1 September 5, 1917, and then in Operation Albion September October 1917 took the islands at the mouth of the Gulf of Riga, British and French commanders on the Western Front had to reckon on the German Western Army being strengthened by reinforcements from the Eastern Front in late 1917. Haig wished to exploit the diversion of German forces in Russia for as long as it continued and urged that the maximum amount of manpower and munitions be committed to the battle in Flanders. Battles of the Third Ypres campaign, first phase, Gough's command, May–August. Haig selected Gough to command the offensive on April 30 and on June 10 Gough took over the Ypres salient north of Messines Ridge. Gough planned an offensive based on the GHQ 1917 plan and the instructions he had received from Sir Douglas Haig. On the understanding that Haig wanted a more ambitious version, Gough held meetings with his corps commanders on 6 and 16 June where the third objective, which included the German Wilhelm Line, was added to the first and second objectives due to be taken on the first day. A fourth objective was also given for the first day but was only to be attempted opportunistically, in places where the German defense had collapsed. An attack of this nature was not a breakthrough operation. The German defensive position Flandrenay lay 10,000 to 12,000 yards behind the front line and would not be attacked on the first day. Nonetheless, it was more ambitious than Plumer's earlier plan, which had involved an advance of 1,000 to 1,750 yards. Major General J. Davidson, Director of Operations at GHQ, wrote in a memorandum that there was ambiguity as to what was meant by a step-by-step attack with limited objectives, and suggested reverting to a 1,750 yards advance to increase the concentration of British artillery. Gough's reply stressed the need to plan for opportunities to take ground left temporarily undefended and that this was more likely in the first attack, which would have the benefit of long preparation. After discussions at the end of June, Haig endorsed Gough's plan, as did Plumer, the Second Army commander. Battle of Pilkem Ridge, July 31 to August 2. The British attack began at 3:50 am on July 31. The attack was meant to commence at dawn, but low cloud meant that it was still dark. The main attack of the offensive by two corps across the Gelderland Plateau to the south, confronted the principal German defensive concentration of artillery, ground holding and Ian Grave divisions. The attack had most success on the left, in front of 14 Corps and the French First Army. In this section of the front, the Entente forces advanced 2,500 to 3,000 yards, up to the line of the Steenbeek River. In the centre of the British attack, 18 Corps and 19 Corps pushed forward to the line of the Steenbeek to consolidate and sent reserve troops towards the Green and Red lines, an advance of some 4,000 yards. Group Ypres counter-attacked the flanks of the British break-in, supported by all available artillery and aircraft at about midday. The German counter-attack was able to drive the British back to the Black Line with 70% losses, then the German counter-attack was stopped by mud, artillery and machine gun fire. Capture of Woesthok, August 10. Two corps attacked on August 10 to capture the rest of the Black Line on the Gelderland Plateau not held on July 31. The advance succeeded, but German artillery fire and infantry counter-attacks isolated the British infantry of 18th Division, which had captured Glencorse Wood. At about 7 p.m., German infantry attacked behind a smokescreen and recaptured all but the northwest corner of the wood, only 25th Division's gains on Woesthok Ridge being held. Albrecht von Thaer, staff officer at Group Whichgate, noted that casualties after 14 days in the line averaged 1,500 to 2,000 men compared to the Somme 1916 average of 4,000 men, and that German troop morale was higher than in 1916. Battle of Hill 70. The Battle of Hill 70 was a subsidiary operation between the Canadian Corps and 5 divisions of the German 6th Army. The battle took place on the outskirts of Lens in the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region of France, from 15 to August 25. General von Kuhl wrote later that it was a costly defeat and wrecked the plan for relieving divisions which had been fought out in Flanders. Battle of Langemarck, 16 to August 18. Fifth Army headquarters was influenced by the effect that delay would have on the coastal operation, which needed the high tides at the end of August or it would have to be postponed for a month. Gough intended the rest of the Green Line from Polygon Wood to Langemarck, to be taken and the Steenbeek crossed further north. In the two corps area the disappointment of August 10 was repeated, with the infantry managing to advance, being isolated by German artillery and then forced back to their start line by German infantry counterattacks. Attempts by the German infantry to advance further were stopped by British artillery fire with heavy losses. The advance further north in the 18 Corps area retook and held the north end of St. Julian and the area southeast of Langemarck, while 14 Corps captured Langemarck and the Wilhelm line north of the Ypres stayed and railway near the Kortebeek. The French First Army conformed, pushing up to the Kortebeek and St. Jansbeck stream west of the northern stretch of the Wilhelm line, where it crossed to the east side of the Kortebeek. Subsidiary operations, 19 August 27, most of the smaller attacks failed to hold ground, although an 18 Corps attack on August 19 succeeded. Exploiting observation from higher ground to the east, the Germans were able to inflict heavy losses on the British divisions holding the new line beyond Langemarck. After 2 fine dry days from 17 August 18, 19 and 18 Corps began pushing closer to the Wilhelm line. On August 20 an operation by British tanks, artillery and infantry captured strong points along the St. Julian Poel Capel road, and 2 days later more ground was gained by 18 and 19 Corps, which left them still overlooked by the Germans in the uncaptured part of the Wilhelm line. 2 Corps resumed operations to capture Namboschen, Glencorswood and Inverness Copse around the Menin road on 22 August 24, which failed with many losses on both sides. Gough laid down a new infantry formation of skirmish lines followed by Worms on August 24. Cavan noted that pillbox defences required broad front attacks so as to engage them simultaneously. The British general offensive intended for August 25 was delayed because of the failure of previous attacks to hold ground, following the Battle of Langemarck, and then postponed due to more bad weather. Attacks on August 27 were minor operations which were costly and inconclusive. Haig called a halt to these operations amidst tempestuous weather. Second Offensive Battle of Verdun. Pétain had committed the French Second Army to an attack at Verdun in mid-July in support of the operations in Flanders. The Second Offensive Battle of Verdun was delayed, partly due to the mutinies which had affected the French army after the failure of the Nivelle offensive, and also because a German attack at Verdun from 28 to June 29 captured part of the ground intended as a jumping-off point for the French attack. A French counterattack on July 17 captured the ground, then the Germans regained it on August 1, then took ground on the east bank on August 16. The Second Offensive Battle of Verdun finally began on August 20 and by September 9 had taken 10,000 prisoners. Fighting continued sporadically into October, adding to the German army's difficulties on the Western Front and elsewhere. Ludendorff wrote, "On the left bank, close to the Meuse, one division had failed. And yet both here and in Flanders everything possible had been done to avoid failure. The French army was once more capable of the offensive. It had quickly overcome its depression. There was no counterattack, as the local Ian Grave divisions were in Flanders. Second phase, Plumer takes over, August 25 November 10. The German Fourth Army had defeated the British advance to all of the objectives of July 31 during August, but the high casualties and sickness caused by the ground conditions, endless bombardments and air attacks intensified the manpower shortage that the German defensive strategy for 1917 was intended to alleviate. Haig transferred authority for the offensive to General Plumer, the Second Army commander, on August 25 and moved the northern boundary of the Second Army closer to the Ypres-Roulers railway. More heavy artillery was sent to Flanders from the armies further south and placed opposite the Guy-Louvolt plateau. Plumer's plans continued the development of British attacking methods, which had also taken place in the Fifth Army, during the slow progress in August against the German defence in depth and the unusually wet weather. After a pause of about 3 weeks, Plumer intended to capture Guy-Louvolt plateau in 4 steps, with 6 days between each step to allow time to bring forward artillery and supplies. Each attack was to have limited geographical objectives like the attacks in August, with infantry brigades reorganized to attack the first objective with 1 battalion each and the final one with 2 battalions. Plumer arranged for much more medium and heavy artillery to be added to the creeping bombardment, which had been impossible with the amount of artillery available to Gough. The revised attack organization was intended to have more infantry attacking on narrower fronts, to a shallower depth than the attack of July 31. The quicker and shorter advances were intended to be consolidated on tactically advantageous ground with the infantry in contact with their artillery and air support, before they received counter-attacks. The tempo of these operations was intended to add to German difficulties, in replacing tired divisions through the transport bottlenecks behind the German front. The pause in British operations while Plumer moved even more artillery into the area of the Guy-Leuvelt Plateau helped to mislead the Germans. Albrecht von Thaer, staff officer at Group Witzgott, wrote that it was almost boring. At first General von Kuhl doubted that the offensive had ended, but by September 13 had changed his mind. Despite von Kuhl's caution, 2 divisions, 13 heavy batteries and 12 field batteries of artillery, 3 fighter squadrons and 4 other Air Force units were transferred from the Fourth Army. German defensive changes. Instead of being 1 to 2 miles distant, as on July 31, on September 20 the British objectives were approximately 1,500 yards away, without the disadvantage of rain-soaked ground and poor visibility encountered in August. The advances were much quicker and the final objective was reached a few hours after dawn, which confounded the German counterattack divisions. Having crossed 2 miles of mud, the Ian-Grave divisions found the British already established along a new defence line, with the forward battle zone and its weak garrison gone beyond recapture. After the Battle of Menin Road the German defensive system was changed, beginning a search for expedients, which lasted for the rest of the battle. In August German frontline divisions had 2 regiments of 3 battalions deployed forward, with the 3rd Regiment in reserve. The front battalions had needed to be relieved much more frequently than expected, due to the power of British attacks, constant artillery fire and the weather, which caused units to become mixed up. The reserve regiments had not been able to intervene early enough, leaving the front battalions unsupported, until the Ian-Grave divisions arrived, some hours after the commencement of the attack. After another severe defeat on September 26, the German commanders made more changes to the defensive deployment of their troops and altered their counterattack tactics, which had been negated by Plumer's more conservative form of limited attacks. In July and August, German counterattack divisions had engaged in a manner analogous to an advance to contact during mobile operations which had given the Germans several costly defensive successes. The counterattacks in September had been assaults on reinforced field positions, due to the restrained nature of British infantry advances. The fine weather in early September had greatly eased British supply difficulties, especially in the delivery of huge amounts of artillery ammunition. Immediately after their attacks, the British had made time to establish a defence in depth, behind standing barrages, in dry clear weather, with increased air support over the battlefield for counter-attack reconnaissance, contact patrols and ground attack operations. Systematic defensive artillery support was forfeited by the Germans, due to uncertainty over the position of their infantry, just when the British infantry benefited from the opposite. German counterattacks were defeated with heavy casualties and on September 28 Albrecht von Thaer, staff officer at Group Witzgott, wrote that the experience was awful, and that he did not know what to do. Ludendorff ordered a strengthening of forward garrisons by the ground-holding divisions. All available machine guns, including those of the support and reserve battalions of the frontline regiments, were sent into the forward zone to form a cordon of 4 to 8 guns every 250 yards. The ground-holding divisions were reinforced by the Stoss Regiment of the Ian-Grave Division being moved up behind each front division, into the artillery protective line behind the forward battle zone, to launch earlier counterattacks while the British were consolidating. The bulk of the Ian-Grave divisions were to be held back and used for a methodical counterstroke on the next day or the one after and for counterattacks and spoiling attacks between British offensives. Further changes of the Fourth Army's defensive methods were ordered on September 30. Operations to increase British infantry losses in line with the instructions of September 22 were to continue. Gas bombardment of forward British infantry positions and artillery emplacements was to be increased whenever the winds allowed. Every effort was to be made to induce the British to reinforce their forward positions, where the German artillery could engage them. Between September 26 and October 3 the Germans attacked at least 24 times. Operation Hohensturm, a bigger German methodical counterattack, intended to recapture the area around Sonnebeck, was planned for October 4. Battle of the Menin Road Ridge, 20 September 25. The plan included more emphasis on the use of heavy and medium artillery, to destroy German concrete pillboxes and machine gun nests, which were more numerous in the battle zones being attacked, and to engage in more counter-battery fire. The British had 575 heavy and medium and 720 field guns and howitzers, more than doubled the proportion available at the Battle of Pilkem Ridge. Aircraft were to be used for systematic air observation of German troop movements to and on the battlefield, to avoid the failures of previous battles where too few aircraft had been burdened with too many duties in bad weather. On September 20 the Allies attacked on a 14,500 yards front and captured most their objectives to a depth of about 1,500 yards by mid-morning. The Germans made many counterattacks, beginning around 3:00 p.m. until early evening, all of which failed to gain ground or made only a temporary penetration of the new British positions on the Second Army front. The attack was a great success and showed that the German defences could no longer stop well-prepared attacks made in good weather. Minor attacks took place after September 20 as both sides jockeyed for position and reorganised their defences. A larger attack by the Germans on September 25 recaptured pillboxes at the southwestern end of Polygon Wood at the cost of heavy casualties. Not long after, the German positions near Polygon Wood were swept away by Plumer's attack of September 26. Battle of Polygon Wood, September 26 October 3. The Second Army altered its corps frontages soon after the attack of September 20, so that each attacking division could be concentrated on a 1,000 yards front. Roads and light railways were extended to the new front line to allow artillery and ammunition to be moved forward. Artillery from 8 and 9 Corps in the south acted to threaten attacks on Zandvoort and Warnton. At 5:50 am on September 26 the 5 layers of barrage fired by the British artillery and machine guns began. Dust and smoke added to the morning mist, so the infantry advanced using compass bearings. Each of the 3 German ground-holding divisions attacked on September 26 had an Ian Grave division in support, twice the ratio of September 20. No ground captured by the British was lost, and German counterattacks managed only to reach ground to which survivors of the frontline divisions had retired. Third phase, the Rains return, October 4 November 10, Battle of Broodseinde, October 4. The Battle of Broodseinde was the last assault launched by Plumer in good weather. The operation aimed to complete the capture of the Gieluwald Plateau and occupy Broodseinde Ridge. The Germans sought to recapture their defences around Sonnebeck with a methodical counterattack also on October 4. On October 4 the British attacked along a 14,000 yards front. By coincidence, Australian troops from Anzac Corps met attacking troops from the German 45th Reserve Division in no man's land when Operation Hohensturm commenced simultaneously. The Germans had reinforced their front line to delay the British capture of their forward positions until the Ian Grave divisions could intervene, which brought more German troops into the area most vulnerable to the British artillery. The success of the British advance varied, but the losses inflicted on the Germans were devastating. German defensive changes. On October 7 the German Fourth Army again dispersed its troops in the front defense zone. Reserve battalions moved back behind the artillery protective line, and the Ian Grave divisions were organized to intervene as swiftly as possible once an attack commenced, despite the risk of being devastated by the British artillery. Counter-battery fire to reduce British artillery fire were to be increased to protect the Ian Grave divisions as they advanced. All of the German divisions holding front zones were relieved and an extra division brought forward as the British advances had lengthened the front line. Without the forces necessary for a counter-offensive south of the Gieluwald Plateau towards Kemmel Hill, Ruprecht began to plan for a slow withdrawal from the Ypres salient, even at the risk of uncovering German positions further north and the Belgian coast. Battle of Poelcapelle, October 9. The French First Army and British Second and Fifth Armies attacked on October 9 on a 13,500 yards front, from south of Bruges to St. Jansbeek, to advance half of the distance from Bruges Ridge to Passchendaele on the main front, which led to many casualties on both sides, with advances in the north of the attack being retained by British and French troops and most of the ground taken in front of Passchendaele and on the Roeselare and Torhout spurs being lost to German counterattacks. Birdwood later wrote that the return of heavy rain and mud sloughs was the main cause of the failure to hold capture ground. General von Kuhl concluded that the fighting strained German fighting power to the limit but that the German forces managed to prevent a breakthrough although it was becoming much harder to replace losses. First Battle of Passchendaele, October 12. The First Battle of Passchendaele, on October 12 was another Allied attempt to gain ground around Passchendaele. The heavy rain and mud again made movement difficult and little artillery could be brought closer to the front. Allied troops were exhausted and morale had fallen. After a modest British advance, German counterattacks recovered most of the ground lost opposite Passchendaele. There were 13,000 Allied casualties, including 2,735 New Zealanders, 845 of whom were either dead or wounded and stranded in the mud of no man's land. In lives lost in a day, this is the blackest day in New Zealand history. At a conference on October 13, Haig and the army commanders agreed that attacks would stop until the weather improved and roads would be extended, to carry more artillery and ammunition forward for better fire support. Battle of Malmaison, October 23 – November 2. After numerous requests from Haig, Pétain began the Battle of La Malmaison, a long-delayed French attack on the Chemin des Dames, by Maester's Sixth Army. The artillery preparation started on October 17, 4 months late. The Germans were swiftly defeated, losing 11,157 prisoners and 180 guns, as the French advanced up to 3.7 miles, capturing the village and fort of La Malmaison, gaining control of the Chemin des Dames ridge. The Germans had to withdraw to the north of the Ailette Valley. Haig was pleased with the French success but regretted the delays which had lessened its effect on the Flanders operations. Second Battle of Passchendaele, October 26 – November 10. The British Fifth Army undertook minor operations 20 October 22 to maintain pressure on the Germans while the Canadian Corps prepared for their assault, as well as supporting the French attack at Malmaison. The 4 divisions of the Canadian Corps had been transferred to the Ypres salient to capture Passchendaele and the ridge. The Canadian Corps relieved 2 Anzac Corps on October 18 from their positions along the valley between Gravenstafel Ridge and the heights at Passchendaele. The front line was mostly the same as the one occupied by the 1st Canadian Division in April 1915. The Canadian Corps operation was to be executed in a series of 3 attacks each with limited objectives, delivered at intervals of 3 or more days. The dates of the phases were tentatively given as October 26, October 30 and November 6. The first stage began on the morning of October 26. The 3rd Canadian Division captured Wolf Copse and secured its objective line and then swung back its northern flank to link up with the adjacent division of the British Fifth Army. The 4th Canadian Division captured its objectives but gradually retreated from Decline Copse due to German counterattacks and communication failures between the Canadian and Australian units to the south. The second stage began on October 30 and was intended to complete the previous stage and gain a base for the final assault on Passchendaele. The southern flank quickly captured Crest Farm and sent patrols beyond its objective line and into Passchendaele. The northern flank again met with exceptional German resistance. The 3rd Canadian Division captured Vapor Farm on the Corps boundary, first farm to the west of Mechiel and the crossroads at Mechiel but remained short of its objective. During a 7-day pause, the British Second Army took over a section of the British Fifth Army front adjoining the Canadian Corps. 3 rainless days from 3 November 5 eased preparation for the next stage, which began on the morning of November 6 with the 1st and 2nd Canadian Divisions. In fewer than 3 hours, many units had reached their final objectives and the village of Passchendaele had been captured. The Canadian Corps launched a final action on November 10 to gain control of the remaining high ground north of the village, in the vicinity of Hill 52. The attack on November 10 brought an end to the campaign. Aftermath, Analysis. In a German General Staff publication it was written that Germany had been brought near to certain destruction by the Flanders Battle of 1917. In his memoirs Lloyd George wrote, "Passchendaele was indeed one of the greatest disasters of the war. No soldier of any intelligence now defends this senseless campaigner." G.C. Wynne wrote that the British had eventually reached Passchendaele Ridge and captured Flandern I. Beyond them was Flandern II and also Flandern III, which was nearly complete. The German submarine bases on the coast remained with the objective of diverting the Germans from the French further south, while they recovered from the failure of the Nivelle offensive in April had succeeded. Paddy Griffith wrote that the bite-and-hold system kept moving until November because the BEF had developed a workable system of offensive tactics against which the Germans ultimately had no answer. In 2007 Jack Sheldon wrote that relative casualty figures were irrelevant, because the German army could not afford heavy losses or lose the initiative, by being compelled to fight another defensive battle on ground of the Allies' choosing. The Third Battle of Ypres pinned the German army to Flanders and cost unsustainable casualties. At an Army Commanders' Conference on October 13 the scheme of Byng's British Third Army for mid-November was discussed. Byng wanted the operations at Ypres to continue so as to hold German troops in Flanders. The Battle of Cambrai began on November 20 when the British breached the first two parts of the Hindenburg Line in the first successful mass use of tanks in a combined arms operation. The experience of the failure to contain the British attacks at Ypres and the drastic reduction in areas of the Western Front which could be considered quiet, after the tank and artillery surprise at Cambrai, left the German Oberste-Heerleitung with little choice but to return to a strategy of decisive victory in 1918. On October 24, the Austro-German 14th Army, under General der Infanterie Otto von Below, attacked the Italian Second Army on the Isonzo at the Battle of Caporetto and in 18 days, Italy lost 650,000 men and 3,000 guns. In fear that Italy might be put out of the war, the French and British governments offered reinforcements. British and French troops were swiftly moved from November 10 to December 12. The diversion of resources from the BEF, forced Haig to conclude the Third Battle of Ypres short of West Rosebeek, the last substantial attack being made on November 10. Casualties. Various casualty figures have been published, sometimes with acrimony, although the highest estimates for British and German casualties appear to be discredited. In the official history, Brigadier General J. E. Edmonds put British casualties at 244,897 and claimed that equivalent German figures were not available, estimating German losses at 400,000. Edmonds considered that 30% needed to be added to German statistics to make them comparable with British casualty criteria. In 2007, Sheldon wrote that although German casualties from June 1 to November 10 were 217,194, a figure available in Volume 3 of the Sanitätsbericht, Edmonds may not have included them as they did not fit his case. Sheldon recorded 182,396 slightly wounded and sick soldiers not struck off unit strength, which if included would make 399,590 German losses. The British claim to have taken 24,065 prisoners has not been disputed. Commemoration. The Menin Gate Memorial to the Missing commemorates those of all Commonwealth nations, except New Zealand, who died in the Ypres salient and have no known grave. In the case of the United Kingdom only casualties before August 16, 1917 are commemorated on the memorial. United Kingdom and New Zealand servicemen who died after that date are named on the memorial at Tyncott Cemetery. There are numerous tributes and memorials all over Australia and New Zealand to ANZAC soldiers who died in the battle, including plaques at the Christchurch and Dunedin railway stations. The Canadian Corps participation in the Second Battle of Passchendaele is commemorated with the Passchendaele Memorial located at the former site of the Crest Farm on the southwest fringe of Passchendaele village. One of the newest monuments to be dedicated to the fighting contribution of a group is the Celtic Cross Memorial commemorating the Scottish contributions and efforts in the fighting in Flanders during the Great War. This memorial is located on the Fresenberg Ridge where the Scottish 9th and 15th Divisions, as part of the British Army, fought during the Battle of Passchendaele. The monument was dedicated by the Scottish Parliament's Minister for Europe Linda Fabiani during the late summer of 2007, the 90th anniversary of the battle. Notes. Footnotes. References. Further reading. External links. Ypres and menu equals sub Third Ypres, Commonwealth War Graves Commission, Passchendaele Euro Canada's Other Vimy Ridge, Norman Leach, Canadian Military Journal, Passchendaele Memorial Plate, New Zealand History Online, Passchendaele, Original Reports from the Times, Battles, the Third Battle of Ypres, 1917, Westhoek The Great War in Flanders Fields A War and Peace Experience, 2nd Lieutenant Robert Riddle, Military Cross, 10th Battalion Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, Passchendaele, October 12, 1917, Guernsey students retrace a soldier's journey to Passchendaele for radio waves, Passchendaele Euro The Final Call Euro James Willard, Uncovering the Secrets of Ypres, Robert Hall, February 23, 2007. BBC News, Belgium, The Battle of Passchendaele. Day-by-day description of battle, Battle of Passchendaele at the Internet Movie Database. Canadian-made movie of the battle, historical film documents on the battles of Ypres at www.europeanfilmgateway.eu.